still remember the exact shade of blue in the sky the morning everything changed. 15 years at Meridian Technologies had molded me into someone I barely recognized anymore. Efficient, politically savvy, and perpetually exhausted. My role as senior product manager had become my identity, my security blanket in a company that grew more cutthroat with each quarterly report. That particular Monday began like any other. I arrived at 7:30, settled at my desk with coffee that never tasted quite right, and began sorting through weekend emails. The calendar notification for the executive briefing appeared, standard procedure before launching the Griffin project, my brainchild for the past 18 months. This project would revolutionize our customer service platform and, if I'm being honest, secure my position in upper management. When I entered the conference room, something felt off. Rebecca from HR sat quietly in the corner, while my boss Martin avoided eye contact. The CEO, James, gestured toward an empty chair beside him with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Tom, thanks for all your work on Griffin," James began, his voice oddly formal. "We've decided to take it in a new direction." I nodded, waiting for details on the pivot, already mentally adjusting timelines and resources. Effective immediately, Griffin will be led by Kevin Phillips. Kevin, my deputy, the one I'd mentored for 3 years, who still regularly came to me with questions about the most basic aspects of our infrastructure. "We feel his approach aligns better with our current market strategy," Martin added quickly. "You'll be transitioning to special projects under the operations team." Special projects, the corporate equivalent of being sent to pasture. "I don't understand," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Griffin is exceeding all benchmarks. The client feedback has been exceptional." James slid a folder across the table. "Your new role comes with the same compensation package. We value your experience, Tom. This is just a realignment of resources." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. 15 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners and postponed vacations crystallized into this moment of casual dismissal. Did I do something wrong? The question hung in the air, embarrassingly vulnerable. "Not at all," Rebecca interjected, her HR voice perfectly calibrated. "This is purely strategic." I nodded, picked up the folder, and walked out. My team watched me return to my desk, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. I said nothing as I collected my personal items. A photo of my daughters at the lake, a ceramic mug my wife had given me years ago, a small plant that somehow survived under fluorescent lights. Kevin approached as I was leaving, his face flushed, with what looked like guilt mixed with excitement. "Tom, I want you to know I didn't ask for this," he said quietly. "Congratulations, Kevin. The team is solid. They'll make you look good." I meant it to sting, and from his expression, it did. At home, I told my wife with practiced casualness, as if discussing a minor schedule change. She saw through it immediately, wrapping her arms around me while I stood rigid, afraid that if I relaxed into her embrace, something might break inside me that I couldn't repair. That night I stared at the ceiling, retracing every meeting, every decision, searching for the misstep that had led here. The company message was clear. 15 years of institutional knowledge, relationships I'd built, problems I'd solved, all were ultimately dispensable. What haunted me wasn't losing the project. It was the sudden revelation that the unspoken contract, my loyalty in exchange for recognition, had been entirely in my head. I had crossed an invisible threshold, from valued to replaceable without even knowing such a line existed. The operations department occupied the basement level of our building, a dimly lit space with aging infrastructure that management had promised to renovate for years. My new desk sat against a wall far from any window, surrounded by people I barely knew. My first assignment was reviewing process documentation that hadn't been updated since 2015. The message couldn't have been clearer if they'd written it on my forehead, "Fade away quietly." I tried to embrace this new reality. I arrived precisely at 9 and left at 5. I attended the required meetings, offered minimal input, and watched as my email inbox, once overflowing with urgent requests, dwindled to company-wide announcements and occasional check-ins from former team members. My wife suggested I look for another job, but something kept me rooted in place. Pride, stubbornness, or maybe the sickening fear that after giving everything to one company for so long, I had become unmarketable elsewhere. "They're still paying. You will?" she pointed out one evening as I nursed a beer on our porch. "Maybe this is a blessing, more time with us, less stress." She was right, of course. My blood pressure had improved. I'd started helping with dinner, attending my youngest daughter's soccer games without constantly checking my phone. But beneath these small victories gnawed the persistent question: had my entire professional identity been nothing but an elaborate self-deception? 6 weeks into my professional exile, the first cracks in Griffin began to appear. Former colleagues texted updates about missed deadlines and client complaints. Kevin had reorganized the team, shelving key components I'd designed as unnecessarily complex. I offered no opinions when these stories reached me, just sympathetic nods and vague encouragements. Their problems weren't mine anymore. Then came the Wednesday morning when Martin appeared at my desk, coffee in hand, a peace offering. "How's it going down here, Tom?" he asked, glancing around the basement with poorly disguised distaste. I closed the spreadsheet I'd been mindlessly populating. "Quiet, peaceful." He nodded, shifting uncomfortably. "Listen, we're having some challenges with the Griffin rollout. Nothing major, just some integration issues with the legacy systems." The legacy systems I had meticulously documented transitional protocols for, which Kevin had apparently disregarded. "That's unfortunate," I replied, my tone neutral. "Kevin mentioned you might have some insights that could help smooth things out." Martin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps you could join a troubleshooting session this afternoon?" I considered the request. 6 weeks ago, I would have jumped at this chance to prove my value. Now I saw it for what it was, not redemption, but utility. They didn't want me back. They wanted access to the mental database I'd built over 15 years. "I'm pretty swamped with these operations reviews," I said, gesturing to my screen. "But I'd be happy to offer some guidance if the team has specific questions." Martin's smile tightened. He hadn't expected resistance. "Tom, this is an opportunity to show your versatility. Your cooperation would be noted. The implication hung between us. Play nice or what little status you have left might disappear entirely." I agreed to attend the meeting. For 3 hours, I listened as Kevin and the team outlined problems that had obvious solutions, obvious to me at least. I offered minimal suggestions, just enough to appear collaborative without solving their fundamental issues. It was petty, perhaps even self-sabotaging, but watching them struggle with problems I could fix in my sleep provided a hollow satisfaction I wasn't proud of. As the meeting concluded, I noticed James observing from the doorway. Our eyes met briefly before he disappeared down the hallway. That night I received an email requesting my presence in his office the following morning. I should have felt anxiety, maybe even fear about this summons. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. Whatever came next, termination, reassignment, or another carefully worded diminishment, I had finally reached the place where professional survival no longer seemed like the only thing that mattered. James's office always intimidated me. Minimalist, cold, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I'd spent countless hours rehearsing presentations here, desperate for his approval. Now I sat across from him, strangely detached, watching him browse through reports on his tablet. "Griffin is 6 weeks behind schedule," he said, finally setting the device down. "We're at risk of losing NextGen as a client." NextGen was our biggest account, representing nearly 20% of annual revenue. Losing them would trigger layoffs, maybe even jeopardize year-end bonuses for leadership. Not my problem anymore, I reminded myself. "That's concerning," I offered neutrally. James leaned forward, his expression uncharacteristically open. "Kevin is struggling, Tom. The team respects you, not him. They're actively resisting his leadership. I've been removed from the project for nearly 2 months. I can't control how the team responds. But you could help fix this situation. James pushed a document across his pristine desk. "We want you back on Griffin, co-leading with Kevin." I glanced at the paper without touching it. "Co-leading? Your technical expertise, his vision for customer engagement, together you could salvage this rollout." The offer dangled before me like bait. 2 months ago I would have seized it, gratefully, pathetically. Now I recognized it for what it was, desperation masked as opportunity. "And if I decline?" James's expression hardened. "Then we'll need to reconsider your future here. The operations role was always meant to be temporary." There it was, the ultimatum barely disguised beneath corporate speak. Save us or leave. "I need time to consider this," I said, rising from my chair. "You have until tomorrow morning." At home, I finally told my wife everything, not just about being sidelined, but about the daily humiliations, the growing realization that I'd given my best years to people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to exploit. "What do you want to do?" she asked, her hand warm against mine. "Part of me wants to tell them to go to hell," I admitted. "But another part is afraid," she finished gently, "of starting over, of failing somewhere new." She was right. For 15 years, Meridian had been my identity, my security. The thought of walking away terrified me more than I wanted to admit. "Or maybe you want to go back for the wrong reasons," she suggested. "To prove them wrong, to make them regret how they treated you." I spent the night drafting 2 emails, one accepting the co-lead position with specific conditions, another tendering my resignation. By morning, I still hadn't decided which to send. James was already waiting when I arrived at his office. Kevin sat beside him, looking uncomfortable. "Have you made your decision?" James asked, dispensing with pleasantries. I placed a folder on his desk. "These are my terms for returning to Griffin." James scanned the document, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Team selection authority? Budget oversight? Direct client communication privileges?" "Yes, and a written acknowledgement that the project's original architecture will be reinstated." Kevin shifted in his seat. "That would mean undoing weeks of work." "Weeks of work that put us 6 weeks behind schedule," I countered, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since my removal. "You dismantled systems you didn't understand because they weren't flashy enough for your vision." James interrupted before Kevin could respond. "These terms essentially demote Kevin to an advisory role. Call it whatever you want, those are my conditions." "This isn't how team players operate, Tom," James said, his tone sharpening. "I was a team player for 15 years. Look where that got me." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken threats and calculations. I could almost see James weighing the cost of meeting my demands against the potential fallout of losing NextGen. "I need an answer today," I added, standing up. "Otherwise I'll be submitting my resignation and accepting an offer I received yesterday." It was a bluff. There was no other offer. But something in my voice must have sounded convincing. "Give us an hour," James said finally. Walking back to my basement desk, I felt lighter than I had in months. Whatever happened next, I had reclaimed something essential that I hadn't even realized was missing. Not just my dignity, but the recognition that my worth wasn't determined by Meridian, Technologies, or James, or anyone else who had reduced me to a line item on a budget spreadsheet. The hour stretched into 2. I used the time to clean out my desk, methodically sorting 15 years of accumulated trinkets and notes. There was something therapeutic about this preparation for either outcome, a physical manifestation of my mental detachment. Whatever James decided, I had already freed myself in ways that mattered more. My phone buzzed with a message from James's assistant. "Meeting in the executive conference room, 2 p.m. The executive conference room, not James's office. A public forum rather than a private conversation. Interesting. When I arrived, the room was unnervingly full. The entire Griffin team sat along one wall, while the executive leadership lined the other. Kevin slouched in a chair near James, his expression unreadable. The NextGen client representatives, Elizabeth Chen and Daniel Murphy, occupied the far end of the table. their presence a surprise that sent a clear message about the severity of the situation. James gestured to an empty chair across from Kevin. Tom, thank you for joining us. I've shared your conditions with the leadership team and our clients. My stomach tightened. Using the clients as leverage was a calculated move I hadn't anticipated. Elizabeth spoke first. Tom, we've worked together for 7 years now? Your team has consistently delivered for us until these recent complications. Daniel nodded in agreement. We specifically chose Meridian because of your reputation for seamless integration. The current issues are unacceptable for our timeline, James interjected smoothly. Which is why we're proposing a restructured approach to Griffin. Tom will reassume primary technical leadership with Kevin focusing on client-facing communications and feature development. I glanced at Kevin, whose tight smile didn't reach his eyes. This wasn't a co-leadership model. This was a public demotion for him. We've reviewed your terms, James continued, sliding a revised document toward me. Budget oversight remains with the executive team, but you'll have full authority over implementation decisions and team composition. I scanned the document slowly, aware of the watching eyes. Most of my conditions had been accepted with minor caveats that seemed reasonable. My reinstatement would be announced company-wide by end of day. The salary adjustment I'd included as an afterthought had been approved without comment. There's one additional stipulation, James added. We need this resolved in 4 weeks. The next-gen deadline is non-negotiable. 4 weeks to fix what had been systematically dismantled over the past 2 months. Nearly impossible, even with unlimited resources. I'll need weekend work authorized, and priority access to the development environment, I countered. Done, James replied too quickly. The situation was worse than I'd thought. I signed the document feeling all eyes on me, some hopeful, others wary. The Griffin team looked simultaneously relieved and anxious. They had witnessed my unceremonious removal. Now they would watch my return under extraordinary circumstances. After the meeting dispersed, Elizabeth approached me privately in the hallway. That was quite a power play, she said, her voice low. I've never seen James concede so completely to anyone. Desperation changes the equation. She studied me thoughtfully. We've received 3 competing proposals in the last week. Companies, promising to deliver what Meridian apparently can't. This information wasn't meant to be shared with me. It was a violation of confidentiality that signaled her own dissatisfaction with Meridian's leadership. Yet you're still here, I observed. For now. She handed me her business card with a personal number scrawled on the back. In case things don't work out with the resurrection plan. The implication was clear. She was offering me a lifeline independent of Meridian, a potential exit strategy. I returned to my old office, hastily cleared of Kevin's belongings, and found the team already gathered waiting for direction. Their expressions ranged from skeptical to hopeful, but all carried the exhaustion of weeks spent implementing, and then unraveling misguided changes. I need honest assessments, I told them. No sugarcoating. How bad is it really? One by one, they outlined the damage. Critical dependencies broken, documentation abandoned, custom logic replaced with generic solutions that ignored our clients' specific needs. The foundation I'd spent years building had been carelessly dismantled by someone who never understood its purpose. 4 weeks suddenly seemed laughably inadequate. But looking at these people, my people, I felt something unexpected stir beneath the cynicism and hurt that had defined me for months. Not optimism exactly, but something adjacent to it. Determination untethered from fear. The next 3 weeks blurred into a relentless cycle of diagnosis, correction, and testing. I practically lived at the office, arriving before sunrise and leaving well after midnight. The team rallied around me with unexpected fervor, fueled partly by desperation and partly by a collective desire to prove that our original vision had been right all along. Kevin remained technically on the project but increasingly peripheral. He attended the mandatory status meetings, offered occasional suggestions that we politely noted and largely ignored. His resentment was palpable but irrelevant to the monumental task before us. By the end of the second week, we had stabilized the core architecture and restored the integration protocols that Kevin had scrapped. Small victories accumulated, test scenarios passing, error logs shrinking, client feedback sessions ending with tentative nods rather than furrowed brows. "We might actually pull this off," Diane, our lead developer, remarked one evening as we shared takeout at the conference table surrounded by whiteboards covered in diagrams and task lists. "Don't jinx it," I warned, though privately I was beginning to believe it too. James appeared at my office door at least once daily, his inquiries brief and tightly controlled. I recognized a shift in his demeanor. The authority dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. He needed this rescue more than I needed redemption. On the Friday of our third week, I received an unexpected visitor. Martin hovered awkwardly in my doorway, coffee in hand, an echo of our basement conversation that felt like it had happened years ago. "Got a minute?" he asked, voice deliberately casual. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, not pausing, my review of the latest test results. "The team is responding well to your leadership," he began. "James is impressed with the turnaround." I glanced up. "Was there something specific you needed, Martin?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to clear the air between us. The decision to reassign you was never personal. It was about giving new talent room to grow." The justification sounded hollow even to him. I could see it in his eyes. "And how did that work out for everyone?" I asked mildly. He ignored the question. "We're discussing restructuring the department after Griffin launches. There would be a director position opening up. James mentioned your name might be on the short list. A peace offering, or perhaps a test." 2 months ago, this hint of future promotion would have sent me into eager anticipation. Now it provoked nothing but mild curiosity. "That's good to know," I replied noncommittally. Martin waited for more, enthusiasm, gratitude, any sign that I still played by their rules. When none came, he nodded awkwardly and left. That night, I finally took Elizabeth's card from my wallet and called the number. "I've been expecting your call," she answered without preamble. "How's the resurrection going?" "We'll make the deadline." "And after that?" "That's why I'm calling." Our conversation lasted 20 minutes. By the end, I had an invitation to interview for a Chief Technology Officer position at NextGen, a role created specifically with me in mind, at nearly twice my current salary. I didn't mention the call to anyone, not even my wife. Something held me back from solidifying this potential escape route with words. The prospect hovered in my mind like a life raft glimpsed from a damaged ship, comforting to know it existed, but committing to it meant accepting that the vessel couldn't be saved. The final week before launch brought unexpected complications. A security vulnerability was discovered in a third-party component we relied on. Fixing it meant rewriting a substantial portion of our authentication module with just 3 days remaining before deployment. I called an emergency team meeting at 10 p.m. on Tuesday, knowing what I was about to ask was unreasonable. Everyone showed up without complaint, eyes tired but determined. "I won't sugarcoat this," I began. "We need a miracle. The next 72 hours will determine whether Griffin succeeds or fails." No one spoke for several seconds. Then Diane stood up. "We've pulled off the impossible before," she said simply. One by one, the others nodded in agreement. This wasn't blind corporate loyalty driving them. I knew that now. It was something more fundamental. Pride in their craft, commitment to each other, and perhaps some small desire to be part of a redemption story. For the next 3 days, we worked in continuous shifts. I stayed on site, catching occasional naps on the office couch. James appeared periodically, his expressions cycling between concern and cautious optimism as our status updates grew more confident. On Friday morning, launch day, we completed the final verification tests. The system performed flawlessly. The team gathered around as I sent the formal deployment notification to NextGen. Elizabeth's response came minutes later. "Preliminary tests successful. Full integration confirmed. Congratulations to you and your team." The room erupted in exhausted cheers. As I watched them celebrate, these people who had followed me through professional hell and back, I realized my decision about the future had somehow already been made, crystallized in the crucible of these past few weeks without my conscious awareness. The Monday after launch, I requested a meeting with James. His assistant scheduled it immediately, a small acknowledgement of my restored status within the company hierarchy. When I entered his office, the atmosphere had changed. Subtly, the intimidating space now seemed merely expensive, its power to affect me diminished. Griffin is performing beyond expectations, James began, leaning back in his chair. NextGen has already signed the contract extension. The team deserves the credit, I replied. They accomplished something remarkable under impossible circumstances. Which brings us to your future here. He slid a folder across his desk, an echo of my demotion meeting that wasn't lost on either of us. As Martin may have mentioned, we're creating a new Director of Technology position. The role would oversee all product development, reporting directly to me. I left the folder untouched. And Kevin? He'll remain in product management with a refocused scope of responsibilities. James's diplomatic phrasing couldn't disguise the effect of demotion. When do you need my decision? James blinked, clearly surprised that I hadn't immediately accepted. Is there something about the offer that doesn't meet your expectations? The compensation package is quite generous. It was indeed. The salary matched NextGen's offer, with additional equity incentives that could prove valuable if the company continued its growth trajectory. But something fundamental had shifted inside me during these past months, a recalibration of what I valued that couldn't be addressed with money or titles. I need to consider what's best for my future, I said simply. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. After everything that's happened, I thought you'd appreciate this recognition of your contributions. That's just it, James. The recognition comes after I proved myself indispensable, not before you decided I was expendable. I left his office with the folder, but I already knew I wouldn't accept the position. The question now was whether to take NextGen's offer or explore a different path entirely. That evening, I sat with my wife on our back porch, a ritual that had become precious to me during my professional exile. You seem different, she observed, studying my face in the fading light. Different how? Lighter. Even during these insane weeks with Griffin, you've been carrying yourself differently, like the weight is gone. She was right. Despite the pressure and exhaustion, I had felt strangely liberated. The company's betrayal had broken something inside me, but in that breaking had come an unexpected release. I've been offered the director position, I told her, and NextGen wants me as their CTO. She considered this without immediate reaction. Which one do you want? Neither, both. I laughed at my own contradiction. Part of me wants to take the Meridian job just to prove I could have it. Another part wants to walk away entirely. Start consulting, maybe. Work with smaller companies, where I could see my direct impact. What's stopping you? She asked. Fear, I admitted. 15 years is a long time to be defined by one place. The next morning, I requested a meeting with my team. They gathered in the conference room. Expectant faces turned toward me as I stood at the head of the table. I've been offered the Director of Technology position, I began. Murmurs of congratulation rippled through the room, but I raised my hand to quiet them. I've decided not to accept it. The silence that followed was profound. I'm leaving Meridian, I continued. Not for another company, but to start my own consulting practice. I want to work with organizations that truly value expertise and long-term thinking over quarterly aesthetics. Their expressions ranged from shock to understanding to worry. Diane spoke first. What happens to Griffin now? To us? That's partly why I wanted to speak with you first. Each of you has demonstrated extraordinary talent and resilience. Some of you might find opportunities with me as my practice grows. Others might step into leadership roles here. I'll recommend several of you for advancement before I leave. I paused, considering my next words carefully. What I've learned these past months is that institutions don't define us. Neither do titles or org charts or even salaries. What matters is the integrity we bring to our work and the people we choose to work alongside. The meeting evolved into an honest conversation about their futures, my plans, and the lessons from our shared Griffin experience. As they filed out, Diane lingered. "I never told you this," she said quietly. "But when they sidelined you, 6 of us drafted resignation letters. We didn't submit them because we thought you'd fight your way back. You taught us that." Her words stayed with me as I walked to James's office to deliver my formal resignation. He took the news with practiced corporate stoicism, immediately pivoting to logistics about transition plans and knowledge transfer. Only as I turned to leave did he drop the facade momentarily. "They won't value you the way Meridian has," he said, a hint of genuine concern in his voice. 15 years builds a foundation that can't be replicated elsewhere. I smiled, recognizing the fear beneath his warning, the same fear I had finally overcome. "That's exactly my point, James. The foundation doesn't disappear when I walk out that door. It comes with me." 2 weeks later, I cleared out my office for the final time. No bitterness clouded the moment, only a strange gratitude for the painful awakening that had forced me to rediscover what truly mattered. The company that had defined me for 15 years had inadvertently given me one final invaluable gift: the courage to redefine myself.